There are fairies on the farm.
My award-winning fairy fantasy novel, The Ghost of Nothing, is available now in paperback, hardcover, ebook, and audiobook, so be sure to check it out. I grew up in western Pennsylvania and have fond memories of playing outside at the edge of a large forest with my sisters and cousins. We often reminisced about our time playing on this small moss-covered hill at the forest border near my grandparents' land. My sisters and my female cousin would talk about the fairies they saw there, though I only caught a glimpse of them once. They must have favored the girls over us two boys. The yard around my grandparents' house had been cleared years, maybe decades earlier by my grandfather. To the left of the house was a large hill, and at the top of that hill the dense forest began. We were always told to stay out of the woods, but just before the tree line there was a small hill covered in moss, fungi, and tiny plants. Something about that spot seemed to draw us in. It was our favorite place to play. I was the third oldest among my two sisters and two cousins, around 6 or 7 years old at the time. I recall playing there often, but one particular moment has stayed with me. When we were all heading inside for dinner one evening, my youngest sister, who was around 3, refused to come down from the hill. I was straggling at the back of the group, so the girls up ahead called back to me and asked me to go get her. I had already run halfway down the hill, so was a little annoyed, but I turned around and climbed back up to the top. When I reached her, I said, "Come on, dinner time," or something to that effect. She only shook her head and said, "But the fairies." Of course, I didn't think anything of this. She was only 3 and had a fanciful imagination. But then I heard a rustling noise to my left. We were standing at the top of the hill, and behind it, the ground was thick with moss, ferns, and tiny wildflowers. The foliage was dense on that side. I turned just in time to see something dart into the undergrowth. The grass and moss were still moving as if something had been there a second ago. Curious, I took a few steps closer, assuming it was a snake or a small animal. Just then, my sister pointed to a spot only a few feet away and said, "Look!" I followed her gaze but saw nothing, just a patch of ferns. I could see the ground through them. There was nothing there. Just as I was about to tell her it was nothing, something jumped from that exact spot. I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. The ferns moved, but I didn't see anything other than that. It was like there was something there, but it was invisible. A strange chill ran through me. Something was up there. My sister wasn't just playing a game of imagination. She had seen something real, something that was invisible to me. I never found out what it was. My family has since moved away, but since then I felt a pull to return to that hill. That area north of Pittsburgh has always felt magical to me. In fact, I did return in 2005 and lived there for 6 years before moving south again. During those years, I had multiple paranormal experiences that I believe were Fae related, but those stories are for another time. I'm still keen to return to that hill. I've always loved that place and firmly believe that something dwells in the forests of western Pennsylvania. I come from Ireland, the land of the Fae folk. I've always believed in fairies. My mother believed and my grandmother before her. We grew up near the Mourne Mountains, where we could see the fairy fort and watch the strange lights dancing at night. My sister and I spent our summers at my grandmother's cottage, running wild through the fields, and swimming in the cold, clear stream that cut through her land. When we weren't roaming the fields, we played in my granny's garden. There was a great old tree there, gnarled and thick. We'd sit beneath it with our dolls, pretending they were fairy queens, or pick wild daisies from the hill beside the house. We were never bored. If we weren't inventing new games, we were dreaming up stories of what we'd do when we were grown. My grandmother used to say I was the only child she had ever known who had been all around the world without ever leaving the garden. But there was always a sense that we weren't alone out there, that something was watching. Granny never let us pick the blackberries that grew along the edges of the fields. Those, she said, belonged to the good people. And if we played too close to the fairy fort, she'd call us back, warning us not to linger. They don't like to be disturbed, she'd say. And that was enough for us. Essentially, fairies were just assumed to be part of the landscape, although we only ever saw them at night, near the fairy fort. Every night, we'd lie awake in the small attic bedroom, staring out the window, waiting for the fairies to begin their dance. It always started the same way, a faint shimmer at the edge of the fairy fort, like moonlight catching on the mist. Then tiny lights would appear, flickering like candle flames, darting and twirling in a way no firefly or moth ever could. Some glowed silver white, others had a golden hue, and a few shimmered blue like the deep sea. We would whisper to each other, trying to count them, but we never managed a full count. We would always fall asleep before we could know how many there really were. Because these dancing lights were so natural and normal to us, it never occurred to us that something remarkable or supernatural was happening. We just knew deep inside that magic and the fairies were a natural part of the world, just as natural as the grass and the trees. And so we drift off to sleep even though we were watching something truly remarkable. I often think about those nights and the lights we saw, the wind in the hedgerows, the feeling that something ancient and magical was out there just beyond our reach. I've moved away from Ireland now, but I'll always believe. The Mourne Mountains hold their secrets, and I know the fairies are still there, dancing in the dark, just as they've always been. My friend and I were camping in a remote coastal spot on the Isle of Mull, far from any roads or houses. We weren't just there for the scenery, we were both deeply fascinated by fairy lore. My friend had studied folklore, and I had grown up hearing old stories about the Sidhe. This trip was a kind of experiment, an attempt to connect with something ancient, though we weren't entirely sure what to expect. We both went into a meditative state, listening to the night. At first, it was just the usual sounds of wind and waves, but then something changed. A high-pitched tinkling, like tiny bells, together with loud, low rumbling sounds that grew in intensity. Then networks of luminous blue lines formed in the air, and the sounds became an indescribably beautiful singing. Wave after wave of luminescent beings appeared of various sizes and shapes. Some were like vast shining jellyfish pulsing in the sky. The most memorable were dazzling figures, 10 to 12 feet tall, surrounded by a flame-like aura that shot outwards into the landscape. These seemed to have a pyramid-shaped head and were flickering with incredibly beautiful interlacing filigree like Celtic knotwork. Some were pure white, others orange, blue, green, purple, iridescent. Their appearance was accompanied by an indescribable bliss and ecstasy, and there was no doubt that they were sentient, and they were fully aware of us, even curious, and we could communicate with them. There was a definite connection with our third eye, so to speak. There were other beings who were more menacing or frightening that seemed to be in conflict with the bright ones. The experience lasted for several hours until dawn. It was an incredible experience, and at the time I felt no fear or urge to snap out of my meditative state. Discussing my experience with my friend, he described an almost identical experience, so I'm convinced it happened and wasn't me imagining things. I've had other strange encounters in remote places, but none as intense as that first time. After doing some research, I couldn't find any recorded fairy legends tied to that particular spot, though the Isle of Mull is rich with fairy stories. Maybe we stumbled onto something. Maybe we were just in the right place at the right time. I believe that many fairy experiences in the past would nowadays be described as a UFO or alien experience, i.e., fairy abductions are often very similar to alien abductions. The Highland fairies, or the Sidhe, have a close connection with the dead, so they are related to ghosts in folklore, i.e., often seen on burial mounds, etc. What I have seen could also be described as angels, and often demons too. As a native Highlander, I associate them also with my ancestors in some way. As for what I saw and what I felt, it was real to me, and I'll never forget it. I was a few days into a tour of England, staying at an old inn in Tintagel after visiting the castle ruins in Merlin's Cave. The place had a strange energy, like the past was still lingering in the air. That night, my friend and I were struggling to sleep, both of us battling colds and exhaustion. In fact, I hadn't really slept well since the tour began. I'm Canadian, and I guess I had trouble adjusting to the time change. Anyway, that night, as I lay in bed, right on the edge of consciousness, something shifted. The air seemed to thicken, pressing down around me, and I realized I wasn't alone. I saw a figure standing in the shadows in the corner of the room. At first, I thought my eyes were playing tricks on me, but then it moved just slightly, just enough to make my breath catch in my throat, and then I saw its face. It wasn't human. It wasn't like anything I'd ever seen before. It had these fierce eyes. They were locked onto mine, and where hair should have been, there were leaves and vines, tangled and shifting like they were caught in an invisible breeze. And I just knew that this man, or whatever it was something ancient, and he seemed to be staring straight through me. I had no words, no sense of what this thing was, only that it was real. And then it just faded away into shadow. I tried to tell myself that it was just the exhaustion. I was seeing things, and maybe I was right about that, I don't know. I definitely was exhausted and sleep deprived. But in a place like Tintagel, with its history, with the myths surrounding that place, it's hard not to consider the possibilities. I'll never forget those eyes, that presence, as if it was an animal in some way. Perhaps it was a felt sense or the expression of the face and eyes, but it was like something that seemed to have walked right out of a legend and announced to me that it and all the legends were real. I was at a festival with my husband, a fairy festival, incidentally, in Oregon. We had just arrived and were out on the hillside. There was a concert stage at the bottom with water behind it and an old growth forest all around us. At the top of the hill was an area with booths. We were sitting under a tree off to the side of the hillside about midday, maybe 1 or 2 in the afternoon. There were lots of people around, lots of music, but the people were spread out across the hill here and there. It wasn't crowded at all. It was a very magical atmosphere. It was sunny out, and we were waiting for friends to meet up with us, when all of a sudden, a bright golden yellow, pixie like creature, about the size of a large dragonfly, zoomed up. From where, I don't know. It flew right into my face and kissed me on the nose, and then it flew off as quick as that. I got just enough of a glimpse of the golden body to tell that it was female, and that was it. My husband was standing next to me and saw it and heard it too, otherwise I would have thought I was going crazy. I considered it a blessing. I was at a fairy festival and was kissed by a real fairy. The best I can remember, it was kind of like a pixie-like being, no more than the length of a finger. It was a golden yellow and had a female body with wings. It flew very fast. The place hosts an annual fairy festival, which was why we were there. We had been invited by a friend who said the place had a very magical feel that had to be felt to believed. Indeed, this was true. I think fairies are guardians of nature. It was a very magical experience. I appreciated it. I felt blessed to have had it, and it was nice to share it with someone else who was there with me. I was about 5 years old when this happened. It was late summer. My grandfather and I were out for a walk in the neighbor's woods, just across the road from his house. The land sloped down a wooded hill, and at the bottom was a bright grassy field. Grandpa was chatting with a neighbor by the roadside, and I, being 5 and easily distracted, wandered off a little way on my own. There was a large maple tree at the bottom of the hill. I walked into the shade beneath it, as the day was quite warm, and I met a little man. He was about 3 feet tall, rotund, had a long white beard, a ruddy, smiling face, and was dressed in mustard yellow from head to toe, including boots and a tall hat with a wide brim and a flat top. I, being only 5, thought he was just another neighbor and said, "Hello." He just smiled at me and gave me a nod with a wide, toothy grin. He had very sparkly, happy hazel eyes, rather like my own, and took a long drag from a clay and wood pipe, similar to an old Bavarian style. I found him enchanting. We stood there for a minute or two, just enjoying the day in companionable silence until Grandpa called for me. I waved at Grandpa and turned back to my new friend, but he was gone. I told Grandpa all about him and asked him if he knew the little fellow. He looked around to see if anyone was there, then laughed and said, "I'm afraid I don't. Sounds like you met an old elf." We went home and never spoke of it again. Years later, when I was 18 years old, I got a job chopping firewood and helping out another neighbor who lived at the top of the hill. He had a 5-year-old son, and one day I noticed he was drawing something very interesting. My heart leaped into my mouth as I recognized the little yellow-clad man. I asked the boy who it was, and he told me, "It's the happy little man who lives at the bottom of the hill under the big maple. I see him sometimes. He's nice." I laughed and said, "I've seen him too." After that, I started to look around for him while I was working, but never saw him myself again. He was like a jolly little gnome. It was a fairy, I feel sure. I felt he was a kind of guardian of that place and meant well. I was traveling through Ireland with a group of friends, doing the whole off-the-beaten-track tour of old castles, ancient ruins, and landscapes. One afternoon, we stopped at this massive hill in County Sligo and decided to climb it to take some pictures up there of the view. It was late afternoon and fairly windy. As we wandered around, I started hearing something, a strange kind of whispering, just beneath the wind. At first, I thought it was the breeze moving through the grass, but the more I listened, the more it sounded like an actual voice. Low, hushed, murmuring just out of earshot. Then I heard my name. I turned, expecting to see one of my friends, but the others were scattered across the hill taking photos, chatting, laughing. None of them were looking my way. Still, I was sure I heard it. Someone calling me, and I recognized it as the voice of one of my friends. I climbed higher, assuming my friend was further up over the ridge, but when I got past the ridge, it was like I'd walked into some kind of sound bubble. I couldn't hear anything but silence. I stopped, feeling a little freaked out, and turned back the way I came, expecting to see my friends, but I couldn't find them. There was just the hill and endless green beyond the ridge. I thought maybe they were on the other side, but I couldn't understand how they had gone out of my view so quickly. I moved lower down the hill, calling out to my friends, and then I heard my name again. It was the same voice I had heard before, the same friend that was calling me, but now it was behind me. I turned toward it and followed the sound, moving quickly. And then there they were, my friends, clustered together on the side of the hill, and one of them was calling my name. I was so relieved. Then one of my friends told me that she'd been looking for me for almost half an hour. I couldn't believe it. I thought I'd only been wandering around for maybe 5 minutes. I turned to the friend I thought had been calling me in the first place and said, "You called my name earlier, right? Up on the hill?" But she shook her head and said, "No, I never called you." I didn't know what to think. I just laughed it off at the time, grateful to be back with my friends, but as we left the hill behind, I kept glancing back, still wondering, what was that voice? Who had been calling me? Was something trying to lure me away from my friends on purpose? And what would have happened if I hadn't found my friends again? Where would I have gone? You hear stories about fairies playing tricks on people, and now I think that might have been what happened. I'm just happy it was a trick, and I made it back to tell the story. Thanks for watching, and a huge thank you to everyone who submitted their stories for this one. There's something so eerie about fairy hills and ancient sites, places where people tend to have these experiences, whether strange lights, music, or fleeting figures just at the edge of sight. These places seem to hold a kind of memory, one that isn't always meant for human eyes. It really makes you wonder if the fairies are drawn to these locations, or if they live there, or if it's some kind of doorway to another world. What are your thoughts? Let me know down in the comments, and let me know if you've had an experience on a fairy hill or sacred site. If you love this kind of eerie fairy lore, be sure to check out my fairy fantasy novel, The Ghosts of Nothing. It's a supernatural tale about a girl from a haunted town that turns out to have more than just ghosts. Fairies are at work there in the shadows, too. The book has won awards and has been getting fantastic reviews, which I'm so grateful for. And if you enjoy the stories I share here in the atmosphere I've created, I really think you'll love it. For a chance to win a free copy of the audiobook, subscribe to either one of my newsletters, either my fairy newsletter, Fairy Lights, or my writing newsletter, The Shaken Tree. Every month I'm randomly selecting a subscriber for this free giveaway, and it's completely free to join. All you need to do is fill in your email. You'll find the sign up link on my website and in the description. All the links are below. If you have a story of your own that you'd like to share, I'd love to hear it. You can submit your fairy experiences through the form on my website, where you'll also find links to the mailing list signups and all the ways we can stay connected. A huge thank you to my supporters on Patreon, as well as everyone who has joined the channel, made a one-time donation through PayPal or Coffee, or subscribed to the paid version of my newsletter. Your support keeps this work going, and I appreciate you all so, so much. If you'd like to support this channel, all the options for support are in the description below. The stories in this video came courtesy of subscribers and the Fairy Census, so a big thank you to everyone who submitted. These stories were edited for dramatic reasons, but if you like to read the original Census stories, you can follow the link below in the description to the Fairy Investigation Society, which has all of them listed there. If you enjoyed this video, please leave a comment, like, share, and subscribe if you're new. It really helps the channel grow. And don't forget to hit the bell to receive notifications when new videos go up. And until next time, this has been a visit from your scary fairy godmother.